Nick, if you can just tell us a little bit about where you were born and kind of paint a picture about that town for us.
Sure. I was born in Nashville, but the town that was my hometown, where I was from, was Franklin, Tennessee. So I was born there in 1961, apparently in one of the coldest winters that they had had in many years, in January 1961. At the time, Franklin was still a very small town. If you go to Middle Tennessee and go outside Nashville now, you'll see a fairly bustling metropolis. That was not Franklin when I was born, when I was very young. When I was born, I think maybe there was like a total of maybe 15 to 17,000 people in all Williamson County. When I was born, up until the time I was about in first grade, there was a livery stable on the square where you actually, people could board horses, rent horses. You would see farm families come in for farm Saturdays. It was just like you hear about in the old days. People, would come in and pick up trucks with the kids in the back. Sometimes they'd come driving tractors with the kids on a hay wagon on the back. It was still a very much rural town. Tobacco was king. There were a lot of tobacco warehouses around Franklin, several of which burned, which caused a lot of excitement for people in the town. So I think you get the flavor. It was very much a small town.
And what about your family? Were they involved in farming, or did they do something else?
Historically, they had been. The McCall family, I think, was among some of the earliest settlers to Williamson County. They had been in Williamson County since about 1814. And that was courtesy of a Revolutionary War land grant that my great, I think that's the right number, great's grandfather had gotten via his service in the Revolution. And so originally the area of Williamson County where the McCall family resided was the Bethesda area, which in the old days was pronounced Bethursda, which is interesting. My grandfather habitually called it Bethursda. And it was absolutely rural, very agricultural. But at some point in time, my great-grandfather decided that he'd had enough of the rural life and wanted to move to town. So in 1890, he moved into Franklin on what was then called Nashville Pike, which is now Franklin Road, literally a half mile away from the downtown square. And the family house actually is still in the family's possession. My sister lives there. So it's kind of the story of the McCalls historically.
Now you mentioned your great-grandfather being involved in the American Revolutionary War. Were your parents involved? Were they did they serve, or did you have uncles or extended family who were in the military?
Absolutely. And that will factor into my story because when just a temporary segue to go forward a bit, and then we'll come back to address the question. When I was looking at going to college and university, my parents often reminded me that there was a pretty strong military tradition in the McCall family, and the added juice to that, if you will, is, and son, we are okay, but we're not extremely well off. And if you want to go to a really good college or university, you need to look at ROTC or looking to go into a service academy. So my father was in World War II. In fact, I'll just point over here. This is a book that I wrote some years ago about his service in the Marines during World War II. Jack McCall, he was known as Pogey Bait because he loved candy, and an old Marine and Navy nickname for candy is Pogey Bait. And so when he was going through boot camp, his buddies found out how much he loved candy, and that became his nickname for the rest of his time with his Marine buddies.
I totally get it. I love candy.
I do too. I inherited it from him. So he was in the Marines and served on Guadalcanal, Rendova, New Georgia, and Guam during World War II. I had an uncle, Bob McCall, who was a few years older than my dad. He was a Marine as well in World War II. He did not see any combat action, but he also was in the Pacific. He was around Fiji, Samoa, the Ellis Islands. Ultimately, he got a fairly terrible tropic disease and had to be evacuated back and spent the last year or so of the war guarding a Navy torpedo factory in Pocatello, Idaho, of all things. You wouldn't think of a torpedo factory in Idaho, but there was one.
Yeah. So you have family history,
right,
that's kind of shaping and molding your appreciation for military
this is true.
service.
This is true.
And on top of that, you have your parents telling you
stories. And here's another one that might be interesting. My mother was 10 years older than my father. My dad was born 1922. My mom was born 1932. And she grew up in central Georgia. But she had an aunt and uncle who lived around Cocoa Beach, Florida, outside Miami. So in 1942 and 1943, occasionally her family would ship her down by train to go spend the summer with Uncle Holly and Aunt Lucille. And they would go to the beach, and there were quite a few times that she would find debris, globs of oil. There were several times where at nighttime she said that she saw explosions some distance out to sea, and they realized the next day that it was a tanker being sunk by a German U-boat. So yeah, I mean, the war surrounded both my parents.
And then there was the ROTC factoring into your life.
Right. Right.
How was that experience? Where did you do your ROTC?
Okay. I did my ROTC at Vanderbilt University, and so that was starting in late August 1979, graduated in all things on Friday, May the 13th, 1983. So I got commissioned and graduated on a Friday the 13th. That probably says a lot of my military career to follow. It was a great experience. It was, as you can think about the timing, only a few years after Vietnam. So it was absolutely also very much a peacetime army. The outlook of the ROTC instructors was what one might kind of describe almost as a cooperate and graduate attitude. At least the first few years I was there. They very much were, look, this is a campus that only 6 or 7 years ago was riven by threats of blowing up our Army ROTC building. There was a lot, obviously, of anger. There was a chapter of the SDS. There were concerns that the Weatherman Underground were looking at doing things. So the ROTC cadre at the time were very much like, you obviously have to wear your uniform at least once a week and come to drills. You're going to be taking ROTC related classes twice a week, but the rest of the time we want you to be comfortable and try to blend into the student body. And they really encouraged us to get involved in extracurricular activities, and I did, absolutely. I thought that was just wonderful, and really enjoyed that. The other thing that was interesting is that when I knew that I wanted to study political science, but I wasn't sure that that would really jive with what the Army's interest was. Well, that was, I basically was put to ease before I even got to Vanderbilt when I was talking with one of the instructors. He said, look, Nick, he said, all we ask is that you study good courses, go underwater basket weaving. He said, but if there's any other kind of reputable, good program you want to study it, do well, make good grades, that's all we want. When you get into the Army, your Army branch will assign you and teach you what you need. So don't worry about that. Just take the classes you want to take and do as well as you can at them to preserve your scholarship. And that's the attitude I took, and it was fantastic.
So you were a poli-sci major?
Poli-sci major. Poli-sci major at Vanderbilt, history minor, and also, although it was not technically a minor, ended up taking 3 years of Russian. So I also had almost enough credits, if I could have arguably minored in that as well. But I just really, I love poli-sci, but I absolutely hated history.
Why the Russian? Let's sit on that a bit. Was the Cold War kind of influencing your thinking there?
Big time.
I better start to
Big
learn
time,
about
Chris,
Russian.
absolutely. That was very much a part of it. Going along with that, I have to say, was a little, I'll use that neologism, strategery. In that, about my late freshman year, early sophomore year, the ROTC cadre began saying, well, you guys at some point need to start thinking about the beginning of your senior year when you're going to have to make a branch selection. So think about what branches of the Army you'd like to serve in. And one of the branches I was thinking a lot about was military intelligence. And several of the instructors said, look, Nick, if you're interested in studying Russian, man, if you do well in Russian, you'll be a virtual shooter for military intelligence. I'm like, well, this is a twofer.
Yep.
I thought it would just seem like an interesting language. But the Cold War was very much a role, very much played a part in my decision to do that.
And so you did 3 years of Russian at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
How was that? Did you pick up the language quickly?
With some effort. I will tell you now that I can basically maybe use what I might call restaurant Russian. I could order something to eat. I can, ask directions to the train station. I can go, ask directions to the restroom and all that other wonderful stuff, but I haven't really practiced it in years.
Yeah.
But at the time, I actually was pretty good at it. I mean, I tend to make A minuses and B pluses, so I wasn't certainly at the top of the class, but I did pretty well.
And then
It was fascinating.
When you graduated, did you immediately put that Russian to use?
No.
What did you do?
No. Okay. Start of senior year, the warning that the cadre had given us came true. At the very start of the senior year, the Army gave us what were referred to as the dream sheets. What branch do you want to be in? And so at that point, I certainly put military intelligence on it. I think we had to sign up for 5 possible branch selections. So military intelligence was certainly one of them. And several members of the cadre are like, Nick, you're going to get it. You're a shooter. This is great. You had to put in at least a couple of combat arms choices. So I think I put down armor and combat engineers. But then I had to come up with another one. And the one I picked was ordnance, the Ordnance Corps. Why that? Well, I knew I was interested in vehicles and cars and trucks and stuff like a lot of young guys, and I knew that ordnance was the branch of the Army that handled research and development of vehicles, mechanical equipment, ammunition, missiles. I mean, it did a lot of interesting things. And I really didn't think I'd get the branch. Now, when I went through Fort Riley for my advanced camp between junior and senior year, the company commander, the regular Army company commander over my group of cadets was also an ordnance officer, a guy named Captain Sick, who was just an outstanding man. And so I started thinking, well, I know a little bit about what ordnance is. I've met at least one exemplar, and if Captain Sick is representative of what ordnance officers are, he's a good man, and I wouldn't mind serving people like that. So I put ordnance down, never thinking I'd get it. So 4 or 5 months go by. January 1983, my last semester, our new ROTC cadre commander is a very tough, hard-nosed guy, a former West Point instructor and a former West Point himself named Colonel Bummy, who calls me in his office like, well, Cadet McCall, congratulations. The U.S. Army wants you to know that you have been selected to the Ordnance Corps. I went, what, sir? He said, Ordnance, Nick. Yeah, you're in the Ordnance Corps. And I said, that was last on my list. He said, I know. We all thought you'd get military intelligence. I said, I thought I would too, sir. What went wrong? He's like, I don't know. Go talk to Major Aaron. Major Aaron is military intelligence. He's the second in command of the unit. So I go talk to Major Aaron, who's just flummoxed as I am. He's like, I thought for sure you would have gotten into military intelligence, Nick. You know, we'll make some inquiries and see if we can't get that fixed. In the meantime, go talk to, I forget the name of the captain now, but there was another captain. I'm going to call him Captain Steve. And so I go talk to Captain Steve, and he sits there and he looks at me. He does, ordnance. You're in the Ordnance Corps? Ordnance. Ordnance? Ordnance? I mean, he keeps turning his head every time he says it. I'm like, yes, sir, that's what they told me. It's like, ordnance? That doesn't make any sense. Why are you in the Ordnance Corps? It's like, that's what I'm here to ask you, sir. Ordnance? Well, you know, you study what? Political science and history and Russian, right? Yes, sir. Ordnance? You should be mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. So it was the square peg in a round hole. And so that does have a major impact then in kind of the way my career worked out, because I did feel like a square peg in a round hole for a lot of my time in the next 5.5 years that followed.
Yeah. So you have this surprise kind of dropped in your lap. Did you talk to your parents about this?
I did.
What did they have to say?
They were just kind of like, well, grin and bear it, son.
Yeah.
I mean, my mother came from both of them having gone through the Great Depression, you know. My father was a little, well, not a little, he kidded me a lot because of the fact I was an Army ROTC and not Marine Option Navy ROTC. That was actually what I originally had set my mind for, but the Army came through with a full 4-year scholarship to Vanderbilt, along with spending money, monthly spending money. They picked up everything except for room and board. And the Navy was like, well, we can't give it to you this year, but maybe we can give it to you next year. It's like, look, guys, freshman year is the make or break year. I can't wait around on the prospect. I'm taking the Army. And so my dad, of course, being an old Marine, is always like, look at my son, an Army weenie. He's a lousy Army guy. He should be a Marine. I'm looking at my no good future shave-tail Army puke son, who should have been a proud Marine officer. So he was always just busting my chops about it. He's like, what do you expect, son? This is the Army, My mom's outlook was also kind of a Great Depression outlook. Her attitude was always, whoever said life is fair. And that was kind of what she said, son, I guess you're in it. You're just going to have to make the best you can. The cadre at Vanderbilt tried to go up to their RTC region to question why it happened, and the answer came back, no, Cadet McCall's orders. Now here's what I did not know at the time. If you think about the 1980s, obviously great tensions in the world. We had detente with the Soviet Union a few years before, but obviously once the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, late 1979, early 1980, detente was out the window. Reagan is out of the president. It's no longer Jimmy Carter, and Reagan is already talking about the evil empire and building up strength, and we're going to do what we can to fight this evil empire and bring down the wall. And so along with that, the Army is undergoing massive buildup, including a brand new weaponry equipment, exactly the kind of thing that the Ordnance Corps exists to maintain, procure, research, roll out, and fix. And so what happened is, when the accession cycle for the cadets of the class of 1983 was coming up, all the various branches then who have their say and have a stake in getting their share of cadets are basically told that a deal has been made with the Ordnance Corps that they are going to get first picks of anybody who has their name on that list, or anybody who does not have their name on that dream sheet for ordnance but has mechanical aptitude. We're taking them. If your branch is full or almost full, and that cadet you're looking at has ordnance by his or her name, they're coming to us because we need to build up rapidly, and that was what happened.
So you got the number 4 on your list of your 5 dream
Right.
positions, and you could have put something else for number 5
I
and
know.
not been on
and,
the
and not
ordnance
been on the
radar.
list, but I put down ordnance
you
number
did.
5, and that was
They
all it
snapped
took.
you up.
And they gobbled me up.
So then what did you do after Vanderbilt?
Okay. So, I mean, that was graduation May 13th, 1983. Obviously took a couple of weeks off just to kind of pack and enjoy at least my last 2 weeks of civilian life. And then at the end of May, I bought a car and drove up to Aberdeen, Proving Ground, Maryland, which is just north of Baltimore.
What car did you buy? Do you remember
I
that?
do. My dad had fun with this too. It was a little red Toyota Tercel. And my dad is like, not only is it bad enough that you are a lousy shave-tail Marine lieutenant, but I fought the Japanese and you bought a Japanese car? Seriously? Now here's the fun. Just another segue, we'll get back to the media question. So when later that year I end up finding out that my first duty station is going to be in Germany, you know, I'm not taking my car with me. I look around and I'm like, well, Dad, I guess you got a new car. So he immediately then slaps a big U.S. Marine Corps sticker on the window and a 1st Marine Division sticker on the bumper plate. And what is so funny is that as I was researching the stuff about my father, I came across a letter one of his buddies had written him right after it happened saying, "So Jackson, I hear that you now drive a Japanese car." Well, everyone's entitled to one mistake, but just make it your one and only. So anyway, so I get my little Japanese car, drive up to Aberdeen, and basically from June to the start of November 1983, went through Ordnance Officers Basic Course, or OBC. About 70 or so of us were in my OBC class, divided in 2 sections, and it's just absolute inundation. Not just in tactics and leadership and personnel management and how to fill out every kind of form and efficiency report known to man. But then, as you would imagine too, also a lot of literal nuts and bolts stuff. Repair and management of artillery systems, repair and management of tank automotive systems. Here's how you order repair parts. Here's how you get repair parts. Here's how you manage repair parts to ensure that your men repair vehicles properly. Everything from tiny little stoves and heaters all the way up to M1 tanks. And it was a lot of information. I mean, to use the expression that we were told the very first day of OBC by a colonel, we would feel at the end of this that we had taken a sip of water from a fire hydrant, and it absolutely felt like that.
Now, through all this ordnance training, were you convinced this is my future? I'm gonna stay here and I'm gonna have a career here, or did it turn you in the other direction?
Well, I think I could say that it was probably more turning the other direction.
Because you still wanted probably to do military.
I still wanted to give the military a chance, and so I was, with a great group of guys. By and large, the people in my basic course were really, and I say guys, it's men and women. We had probably 1/3 of the class being female. Outstanding group. I mean, really, it's amazing. I ended up making friendships with quite a few folks in my class that remain. I mean, here it is over 30 years later. I'm still as tight with these guys as I would be, say, with friends of mine from elementary and high school or from college. In some ways tighter. So, there was great camaraderie. I have to say that a lot of it was really very interesting. Even if I'm saying to myself, how is this going to work? If ultimately when I need to have higher rank, somebody is saying you're going to have to train with industry or you're going to have to go work in a staff or headquarters facility where you need to be an engineer. And I'm saying I'm not an engineer. So honestly, I did have doubts. And I also kept thinking, well, maybe if I show myself to be a great officer, maybe that will help me get a transfer to military intelligence. So I would have to say, I wasn't ready to jump ship just yet. I knew I was going to keep my eyes open, but I was concerned about what the future might hold.
And was it ultimately that camaraderie that kept you in ordnance?
In large part,
Yeah.
yeah. Camaraderie, and also just kind of some of the experiences I had. So to also be clear, I ended up leaving active duty. It was slightly less than 5.5 years after I graduated from Vanderbilt. And there were multiple reasons for that, but we can get to that here in a few minutes.
So, wrap up the ordnance
Sure.
training for
Okay.
us. How did that end?
Well, it basically ended with a long field exercise. We were sent out into the field. It was shortly before Halloween, 1983. That is a very interesting time internationally because that's around the time that KAL Flight 007, a Korean airliner, had been shot down when it took a wrong turn over the Soviet Union and the Russians shot it down. That happened only a few weeks before we go on this big field exercise. It's supposed to be kind of the capstone for our tactical and combat training. While we were in the field, one of our instructors, who was an entry officer, gets out and kind of puts his hands on his hips. He's like, okay, everybody break into mock war right now. Every one of you up. This is a beautiful morning this morning. I'm here to tell you that while you all were busy last night fighting off your mock attacks by the enemy, we invaded Grenada. And some people who were going through infantry OBC, like you're going through ordnance, got pulled out of their OBC early, and they were loaded they were loaded up with their parachutes, and they are dropping with the 82nd Airborne into Grenada right now. And we might have a real war in our hands, and you guys might be rapidly for training quicker than you think. So if you've taken this for granted or think this is a joke, get over it, get back in your foxholes, the war's beginning again. So that was another real world slap in the face. And frankly, you remember what it was like, in the early 1980s. It was at peacetime. But in a lot of ways, that Cold War, it was absolutely still going on. We knew it was a Cold War, and there was always that threat and that worry about getting home. That actually happens when I get to Germany a few weeks later. So, graduate from OBC, took a few weeks off, roughly a month, and then my orders were
What did you do for those few weeks? Did you
just
go
went back
did
home
you-
to Franklin.
Back home to
Went
Franklin?
back home to Franklin, Nashville, hung up with my parents, and of course they got kind of emotional because I know I'm going to Germany for 3 years, may or may not get leave to come back, I don't know. Get to see some of my professors at Vanderbilt, get to go back and visit my ROTC instructors, several of whom were extremely helpful. Having been stationed in the area around Frankfurt, which is where I was going to be, they gave me a list of good people to get to know, some German civilians who could be helpful to me, great places to eat, places you need to go visit. A couple of them gave me like some Frommer's type travel guides they had used, and said, you're going to have a lot of serious work to do, and it's going to be tough, but you're going to have a good time.
Do you remember what your dad said to you? Did he give you any advice for going over to Germany? Or?
He told me to keep my nose clean, to take care of my men, and not to do anything stupid. And my mom pretty much started crying.
And then after those few weeks, you went
And I
to
went
Germany.
over to Germany.
Had you been to Germany before?
I had not. This was my first trip overseas.
Any German language?
Not much,
Okay.
other than what I had seen on Hogan's Heroes. I mean, I'm joking, but I knew a little bit of German, but certainly had not had any German classes yet. The flight over turned into something that was pretty astounding. So, a few days before I left to go to Germany, ABC had shown a two-part mini-movie that was called The Day After, about a nuclear war and what the threat, what would happen after a nuclear war. It was pretty horrifying. I did not watch it. I'd already heard enough descriptions. And knowing that I'm going to West Germany, where we do have nuclear weapons, where we have nuclear missiles, where we're all concerned as things happen, I did not want to psych myself out. I'm like, I've heard enough about it. I'm sure it's a powerful movie. I know enough about, the disarmament, the no nukes movement and all that, and I can't say I argue with that. I just know that in a matter of days, I'm going to West Germany. I don't need to freak myself out over this stuff. Well, what happened is, the day that the 747, which me and several hundred other people were loaded up at St. Louis Airport to fly into Rhein-Main Air Base in Frankfurt, the day after is actually shown on German television. This is a time when the Green Party now, as of this day, is one of the central office holders in German government. At the time, they still were a very budding organization. You know, they are very anti-nukes, anti-military, frankly, anti-American, anti-capitalism. They're not communist, although some of their members were former communists. They certainly have a very strong socialist streak. But they learned somehow, unbeknownst to me, that most other people on the 747 that's been chartered by the Army are actually members of the 56th Field Artillery Brigade. And if you look at their patches on their shoulders, it has a silhouette of what is clearly a Pershing missile with a pair of lightning bolts going down. These are Pershing II missile crews that were being flown over on my airliner with me. I'm not part of them. I'm happening to go to a unit called 3rd Support Command, which is a logistical unit under U.S. 5th Corps. But everybody else the airliner are all Pershing II nuclear missile crew. Somehow the Germans found out that this plane with all these guys was coming in at this particular day and time in Rhein-Main, and it was just after the day after it had been showed on German TV. So, you know, we get over German skies. It's probably like about 10 or 10:30 in the morning. You know, little patches of cloud, but generally sunny. But as we get close to Rhein-Main, it almost looks like fog in some of the areas. So when the 747 pulls on the runway and pulls up to the gate, we sit there and we're waiting, and the people are getting arrested behind me. And I'm a second lieutenant. Turns out I'm the senior ranking officer on the plane. I mean, there are sergeants who've been in for 20 or more years, all the way down to privates. And they're all behind me. They're all mumbling and grumbling, and I'm sitting here like them wondering what's going on. And then a hatch opens up, and a fellow comes on wearing what's called MOP Level 4. MOP stands for Mission Oriented Protective Posture. It is a full chemical suit with a gas mask, with a hood, with helmet, with LBE, load-bearing equipment, and an M16 rifle. You know, rubber gloves pulled up. It's like he is ready for a poison gas attack. And within moments of that hatch opening up, all of our eyes start watering and people start sniffling and choking and coughing. And this guy is like, you know, wearing his mask. He's like, I need to see the most senior officer on this plane. Is that you, sir? And I'm now like, what is going on here? He's like, sir, that is Mace. We are having a brawl going on outside these gates. There are several thousand West German civilians trying to storm the gates of Rhein-Main. And I'm a military policeman. Me and my guys and the German Polizei are trying to fight them back. So until we can get control, you all need to stay on this plane. You need to tell these people behind you to sit down and shut up. Okay.
Welcome to Germany.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And so finally, you know, we sat on the plane, I don't know, 30 or 45 minutes before we finally got off. And a sponsor had been sent to me from my unit, which was in the town of Hanau. Hanau is a town roughly about the size of Knoxville, which is located approximately 25 kilometers northeast of Frankfurt. The unit I was assigned to was a maintenance company. It was the 81st Maintenance Company. That belonged to the 8th Maintenance Battalion, which itself belonged to 3rd Support Command, which was the primary logistical command responsible for maintenance, supply, transportation, medical services, quartermaster services, etc., for U.S. 5th Corps, which was headquartered in Frankfurt. And so I have a sponsor waiting for me, and she greets me and she says, man, this is not like this every day, but you'd be surprised how many times we have riots in Frankfurt and in Hanau, and you're just got to get used to that. So she drives me off. It's December 1st, 1983, drives me down to Hanau, where I start, you know, getting assimilated, meeting my senior officers, my fellow officers, meet the troops and all that. I had not even been there 48 hours, and I'm staying in basically kind of like guest quarters, you know, for people who have been assigned permanent quarters like officers' housing or BOQ or things like that. And so this is a weekday, and so at dark 30 in the morning, I mean, it's supposed to be like 2:30 or 3 in the morning, the telephone in my room rings. Bear in mind, again, I've only been in Germany for a couple of days. I haven't been issued anything. I just have, my uniforms are brought with me. but I don't have a helmet, I don't have my load-bearing equipment, I haven't been assigned a rifle or pistol, nothing. And the telephone rings, and this voice starts going, "Larry, advance, sir." What? Sorry, say that again. "Lariat, advance." Like, you're saying Lariat, advance? Yes, sir, Lariat, advance. He keeps saying this, just really agitating. And I'm like, what are you telling me? And the guy's like, "I'm not supposed to breach security, sir. This is a code word. It means you need to get into the post immediately. Out." And I'm just like, what's going on? It was an alert. And it turned out that on that particular day, we found out later that some things had happened on the Soviet side. We don't, this is something I would love to look into and find out what the real story is. But the rumors and rumblings we heard later is that the Soviets, learning that we were fielding the Pershing II missile crews, began to freak out. And that somebody on their side did something either late night or early one morning to make it look like that they were about to go on alert. So when they go on alert, we go on alert. And so this was not just my battalion or 3rd Support Command. This is all of 5th Corps. You know, a warrant officer who is assigned to me, who's going to be basically my second in command of my 1st platoon, picks me up. And so as we drive to Pioneer Caserne in Hanau, which is where the company's billets are, everybody in the whole place, you can tell every unit there, everyone's like running around in various states of dress, trying to get their battle gear on, get to their vehicles, form up into vehicular formations where they could deploy to frontline positions, etc. And so that was my second day in Germany. Welcome again to Germany. I had barely been there 10 days and a truck blew up in our motor pool. Now it turned out later it was actually a mechanical defect. It was, something was wrong with the ignition system, but again, German terrorists, you know, when they got reported, heard about it and started making false statements and saying, "Oh yeah, we cut a hole in the fence, we blew your truck up." That didn't happen. That wasn't true.
Were you prepared for any of this? Did you
Oh,
feel like, even though there's no war with the German people, there's no war with the Russians, there's still this Cold War going on there, there's still this fear and anxiety in the world, and I better be prepared for anything when I hit the ground in Germany?
Well, I did have that feeling for
Yeah.
sure. So I knew I had to be prepared for things, but the thing about it was I was not prepared for what the thing was, and that these were the things that were happening. Even if you know their protests, even if you know your demonstrations, it's one thing. You're thinking of protests as an American protest. You know, people with signs, people like we've seen, like, you know, in Nashville recently or in other places. You know, people protesting. These were people throwing Molotov cocktails. They're throwing rocks. They are grabbing Polizei policemen, beating them up. There are policemen coming back with these big armored vehicles, with these water cannon that are like powerful hoses. But if a protester gets hit by a water cannon, it literally shoots him something like 50 to 100 yards. You would hear people breaking their heads, breaking bones, dying sometimes from being blasted off their feet, losing their balance, and cracking their skulls open. I mean, this is like war. And we start seeing this, and I begin to realize this is very dangerous. And I'll just say that the number of times then over the next 3 years where we either had run-ins with violent protesters, angry West Germans who just were taking it to the max to say, "We want you out of here, you and your stinking missiles. You're painting a giant bullseye on West Germany, get the hell out of here." I mean, I actually had German students my age say that to me, and worse. When I visited a friend of mine in a German university, they were getting in my face and just saying everything but "You're a dirty dog, get out of here."
And to
it
be
was scary.
clear, you yourself did not have anything to do with the nuclear weapon.
Exactly. No.
You weren't involved in that area, but
Right.
you still felt the brunt of that.
I was, being the fact that I was an American in uniform, I was a representative. And that's, of course, the way as an officer you were trained and the way you feel. But it wasn't just the fact that I knew I was a representative of the U.S. military and the United States, too. But clearly a lot of West German civilians saw it exactly the same way. And they had my number, and so like, okay, you're over here hanging out with your good friend Gunter. Well, let me take this moment to give you a public service announcement. You know, get you and your effing nuclear weapons out of here, get you and your effing tail out of here, get the hell out of my college, get the hell out of my town, and get out so fast it'll make your head spin. I mean, we really had discussions that blunt.
Now, how did you handle those situations? Are you a diplomatic person? Did you handle those with tact?
I did. I bit my tongue. I bit my lip. The number of times I just want to go back and just say, get off my case, But I just realized I've got to listen to this. And the fact that I had made some nice German friends my age, they understood that it was stressful, and they were kind of like, when they could get a chance, they're like, let's find some place quiet. And I'm like, yeah, that would be nice, thank you. But I realized that if I lash back, it'd only make things worse, because particularly when these things happen, I'm like one American, in a dormitory with 15 or 20 West Germans around, and it's like, okay. And if I blow up and yell or anything, they'll say, see, we told you he's just a typical hot-headed American cowboy, just like his President Reagan. So I knew I had to govern myself accordingly.
Did you wear your uniform out?
No. I mean, I did obviously going and coming to the post, but, at least I tried to keep a real delineation between when I was off duty and when I was on duty. And so obviously when I was on duty, I wore the uniform. When I was off duty, I actually found a place where I could live with the German family. And so for the time I spent in Hanau, which was December 1983 to about November 1985, I lived with the German family. They had a son who was my age. His name was Gunter. And so it was just wonderful. The father had been through World War II. Actually, father and mother had been through World War II. And the father actually was captured by the Red Army at the end of the war and spent some years in a gulag prison camp. He had some pretty horrendous stories. So that gave me a completely different perspective on the German experience that I wasn't expecting to have. But having a young, German guy who was about my age, who was really very funny. We keep up. I mean, even this day, I haven't seen him a long time, but we still email and send each other letters occasionally. So I still feel like I have a Longo pen pal who's kind of in my life.
And you do still have some fond memories of your time.
Oh, yeah, I did. Oh, I had a great time.
Wasn't all Cold War events.
Oh, exactly.
You made some friends over there and got some leave time and got to do some.
I did.
Some sightseeing.
I did.
Yep.
I did. And so
overall, did you enjoy your time in Germany?
I had a great time in Germany. I mean, and part of the thing too, I'll jump forward a bit. So I was with the maintenance battalion in Hanau until the fall of 1985. One of the things that made a huge difference in my life is I ended up spending roughly my last 13 or 14 months as a general's aide to the commander of 3rd Support Command, who was a wonderful human being. I actually kind of consider him to be my second father. And we had a great relationship. That's not always the case with a lot of aides and generals. I mean, generals, they're senior officers. They have a lot of responsibility. A lot of them get to that responsibility because they're not shy about cracking heads. A lot of them are really tough customers. And that's not saying that William B. McGrath was not a tough customer, but he was generally a very decent human being. And he was just really patient with me in ways I found that some other generals were not with their first and second and lieutenant and captain aides. But he would actually, and there were occasions where he would say, now Nick, I'm going to travel to Heidelberg. You don't have to come with me today. You can stay in the office and do things, but would you like to go? And I'm like, yes sir, sure. Or we're going to Frankfurt today, Nick. And sometimes it was a choice and sometimes it was an order. And obviously he's like, we got to go. It's like, we got to go. Of course, we'll go. I'll grab the bag, I'll carry the stuff, I'll make the phone calls and do everything for you and coordinate your life while you're in meetings with the Corps commander. But there are a lot of times he would just say, hey, I've got a social event where we're going to be meeting some West German officers tonight and going to a fancy West German club. Would you like to go? Oh, yes, sir, I'd love to go. I mean, it was great. It was neat.
That's neat. And so that added to your overall experience along with the friends that you made.
Yeah.
To kind of compensate for the
more stressful,
more complicated issues of their service in Germany.
Yeah.
So what happened after Germany then?
Okay, after Germany then, I came back stateside, went through advanced course at Aberdeen Proving Ground again, and that was a period of about 7 months. So at this point, I got another dream sheet. At this point, I've had pretty good experiences in the Ordnance Corps, but I'm still not sure what the future holds. So I now have a dream sheet that says, well, where would you like to be stationed now that you're back in the States? Well, I try to get back to Germany, but they said, no, it's too soon for us to send you back over there.
You did
That's how
wanna
much
go-
I enjoyed
you did
it.
wanna go
I
back,
loved it,
yeah.
going back to Germany. Yeah, I had such a really great experiences. But I put down several places. I put down Fort Campbell, knowing that would be close to home, and my parents would be pretty fired with that. Although, also knowing that 101st Airborne Division is no pushover, and that even in peacetime Army has a tough duty. And I knew that. But the selection I got was actually Fort Lewis, Washington, which was a fascinating place. It was out in the West Coast. I'd never been that far out west before. End up with the 9th Infantry Division, which at the time was a really unusual unit. It was the Army's only motorized division. What this meant is the Army was trying to come up with a division that was different from, say, light infantry, i.e. leg infantry, where guys are just basically getting around by marching or being airlifted in. And on the other end, being different from mechanized infantry, where they ride around in Bradleys or M113 armored personnel carriers, things that are highly mobile but are very heavy and difficult to load and transport if you need to get people into an emergency crisis zone quickly. So motorized division was basically an idea to kind of bridge the gap with that. We want something that can basically be light, mobile, fast, easily deployed, something we can drop anywhere. You know, whether we need to put them in the Horn of Africa or in the Middle East, or drop them on the northern flank, you know, of Europe to defend against a Russian attack into Denmark and in Norway. And so that was what this division was there for. The division commander was a guy named John Shalikashvili, who later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was an amazing guy. And I got to know him a fair bit. I ended up being assigned as a battalion staff officer to a support battalion that was in charge of a lot of, again, latent, logistics, maintenance, repair, etc. for many of the units of the 9th Infantry Division. Got to see a lot of the way the unit was organized and structured. Got to be involved with a lot of really interesting command post exercises, including some preparing for a possible war with North Korea. That was one of the places we were notionally assigned, as if anything bad ever happened in Korea, the 9th ID would be moved from, and since we're on the West Coast, it'd be easier to move us from, say, Fort Lewis to get us into Seoul or Busan or one of those places to have us deployed. And we actually practiced several times moving to South Korea to deter North Korean threat.
Now you talk about this work, and I can kind of sense the passion
Yeah.
in you. By this point, when you're in Washington, are you thinking ordnance is really where my heart is?
Well, I still had made efforts to get to military intelligence, and several
Okay.
times military intelligence said, we'd love to have you, be great, but you have to be released by the Ordnance Corps.
Okay.
And every time I then said, okay, so military intelligence, check. Ordnance was like, we're not letting go of you. You know, it went from first like, oh no, we want to have you get in. You need to get into ordnance to experience. Now it's like, we put too much time and effort, invest in you. Why do you think we're gonna let go of you? And it's the point where, but you're still telling me that even though I've been a general's aide, I've had company command, I want company command, I've had great report cards, you're still telling me that because I don't have the background that you all expect, that because I probably will not be able easily to train with industry, that I might retire as a major lieutenant colonel. And their attitude's like, well, if you feel that way, you can resign your commission. Then that opens up a vacancy for somebody who really wants to be in the ordnance branch. At that point, my attitude's like, well, okay, if that's the way you're going to be about it. I've also been interested in law school. I think I'll just take the LSAT, see how I do. That's the course that happened. Is I basically was admitted to several law schools, including University of Tennessee. Spent some time just in the nice building next door, 3 years here. But left active duty in the summer of 1988. And stayed in the inactive reserves. Didn't really do much with that. Once I got to law school and then began practicing law, I just realized that the demands of being a really good lawyer were such that it would be really difficult to be a good reserve officer at the same time. I just said, I need to do one or the other. In fact, my last battalion commander said, Nick, you made your choice. He said, you had a great experience in the regular Army, but you decided to be a lawyer, you need to be a lawyer. And that was really very decisive in my final decision to get out of the reserves.
So you got your law degree from UT?
Right.
Do you remember what year you got your?
Oh, absolutely. May 1991.
And where did you practice?
In Nashville for about 3 years. I worked for the chief judge of the U.S. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals for my first year, then for a Nashville law firm that was at the time called Ferris Warfield and Canada. And it went through a pretty spectacular law firm breakup. My wife, who I had met at UT Law School, was a Knoxville girl. She was not having
So
a
you
great...
met the woman, got married,
Exactly.
and got your law degree all in one.
All more or less in one fell swoop. For various, many reasons, Jenny was having a difficult and challenging time in Nashville. She said, "I know you're going to look, now the law firm's breaking up, but you're going to look for options in Middle Tennessee, but do me a favor, look for something in Knoxville." And so ended up talking
Because
she's a Knoxville, yeah. And so a law school friend of mine was working for a Richmond-based law firm called Hunt & Williams that had an office in Knoxville at the time. And they needed somebody. I was becoming an expert in corporate securities law. They needed somebody who could do stock offerings, IPOs, private placements, proxy statements, all the securities related stuff. I'd had enough exposure to that I was, able to walk, talk, and chew gum around it. And they said, "Well, we really need you. We need you here." Now, the other funny coincidence is one of the three partners in the Knoxville office was a former West Pointer who had been a pretty much a Vietnam War hero, a guy named John Lucas, who had been in the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam. And the moment he heard that I was interviewing, he's like, "I hear there's an Army man here, regular Army? Were you West Point?" I went, "No, I'm sorry, I wasn't West Point, but you're regular Army." I went, "Yeah, I was regular Army. I got a regular Army commission." He was like, "Well, that's just the kind of fine young man we need." So I think that helped a little bit too.
Sure did. Nick, we're grateful for this interview. Is there anything you would want people to know about your
Sure.
military service?
A couple of things I think I would say, and not so much about me, is about more some of the people with whom I've served. Some of the experiences I had with soldiers, there were some where these guys would do things that I would just look at them as like, why, how, what conceivable brainstorm did you get to make you think that this was a good idea? And some of those things they did, I would just, or better left unsaid, but it's just truly just head-shaking, heart-stopping moments of just absolute fear mixed with terror and the consequences of one of the things your soldiers have done, that now you're going to have a senior officer come and you thought this was a great idea. Why, Lieutenant? But by and large, they are the people I still think about every day. I mean, here it is. I have been away from the Army since 1988, and I still see their faces. And I can still name some of them. I can still name you by their first names, not just the last names. I can tell you where they're from. I can tell you what they did. We were told as second lieutenants that the best thing you can do is get yourself a little pocket notebook and just try to get as many facts as you can about your soldiers and your platoon so you get to know them. And I took that seriously, and I still remember a fair bit of that. That was a priceless experience. I mean, I think honestly, it's something that a lot of people would say that probably sounds crazy, but in some ways, I honestly think that being in the military made me into a better person. I had to interact with people from walks of life that I never knew existed, and I found a way to have rapport with them. Even though it didn't mean that there weren't times you look at these guys and you just want to throttle. It's like, you just did the dumbest thing imaginable. I just want to murder you. But at the same point in time, for everything they did, that would just have you just shaking your head like, I can't believe this just happened. There was also a time where you just had to shake their hands or just say, I'm putting you in for an Army Achievement Medal or a letter of commendation or something. You wish you could do that for them 5 or 10 times more because they just really could knock home runs to you. I think that's the thing I take with me, is just really, it was a formative time in my life, and I feel lucky I was in the time I was. It was the last time there was really truly a peacetime Army. And yeah, because really about a year after I left, we went into Panama, and then after that, it was Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and it's just been one thing after that. So I think it was unique. I was lucky to be in during the last real years of the Cold War and to see what it was like in West Germany, including some scariness, but also to be in the last peacetime Army this country has had.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. Enjoy it.